Today's material explores the intersection of quantum mechanics and personal transformation, arguing that feelings of unease signal an individual is in a state of superposition between two overlapping realities. It has this deeply hypnotic, encouraging tone, but we want to jump straight into the feedback and introduce our first area for improvement. So, looking at the epistemological framing, the text relies really heavily on the many-worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the text treats quantum decoherence not as a metaphor for personal growth, but as literal biological reality.
Yeah, they really treat it as a hard physical fact.
Right, so my question is, does presenting highly theoretical physics as absolute, undisputed fact, like saying this is what the mathematics says directly, clearly, without ambiguity, does that alienate the very critically minded listeners the piece is trying to persuade?
Grounding spiritual concepts in quantum mechanics creates a compelling narrative, but asserting these parallels as literal, undisputed scientific facts rather than profound metaphors risks undermining the argument's credibility.
Undermining it because they take it a bit too far.
Exactly. The main weakness here is that the material explicitly claims its assertions are, quote, not metaphorically true. It insists that the many worlds interpretation was, never proven to have a collapse mechanism.
Which, if you know anything about physics, is a highly debated topic.
Right. It treats a specific, highly theoretical interpretation of the Schrödinger equation as this absolute truth for macroscopic human consciousness.
Yeah, it basically conflates microscopic quantum states with, complex human decision-making.
Yes. And that conflation creates a massive intellectual gap. A knowledgeable listener will just immediately trip over it. Instead of absorbing the self-help message, they're suddenly fact-checking the science in their head.
Oh, totally. You pull them right out of that nice receptive state. So how do we fix that? What's the suggestion?
The suggestion is to completely reframe the connection between quantum physics and personal growth. You don't need to insist it is the literal physical truth of how human life choices work. Instead, frame it as a highly resonant, powerful model.
Like a conceptual framework, rather than, biology.
Exactly. Frame it as a lens that perfectly maps onto human intuition.
Okay, I really like the idea of calling it a lens. Do we have concrete examples of how to actually tweak the writing to reflect that?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, instead of saying something rigid like, this is not a metaphor, this is the actual behavior of the actual field, the author should adjust the phrasing.
To something a bit softer?
Right. Try something like, the mathematics of quantum mechanics offers our most profound blueprint for understanding this internal shift.
Oh, blueprint. I like that. It sounds structural and authoritative, but it's clearly a guide, not a literal cellular process.
Exactly. And another concrete example comes up when discussing the collapse of the wave function. Instead of aggressively claiming it was never proven, which is just an invitation for an argument, reframe it entirely.
How so?
Write something like, many physicists now look at the mathematics and suggest reality doesn't collapse, but branches a lens that changes everything about how we view our own choices.
That is so much more approachable. It's like you're inviting the reader to try on a new perspective. But, if we adjust this theoretical framing, we also need to look at how that theory is paced and delivered to the audience.
Yeah, pacing is crucial here.
It really is. Reading the first half of this draft is, it's like a plane with an incredibly long runway. The audience is kept in a state of theoretical abstraction for a very, very long time before the actual how-to takes flight. I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this. How do we restructure the delivery of the practical advice?
The extensive buildup detailing the nature of the quantum field creates excellent suspense, but delaying the practical application dilutes the transformative power of the core message.
Yeah, because by the time you get to the actionable stuff, you're almost exhausted.
Right, that's the weakness. The actionable advice, specifically those really great practices of sitting in uncertainty and scanning the body to find where the overlap lives physically, they arrive just far too late in the material.
Like thousands of words in, right?
Yes. The listener's forced to wade through all this abstract physics and spiritual philosophy before being told what to actually do with this information. It severely risks audience fatigue.
So they might just click away before they even get to the exercises. What's the suggestion for fixing that structure?
Introduce a micro-practice or a concrete physical anchor much earlier in the script. You have to ground that dense theoretical physics discussion in the listener's immediate, present-moment bodily experience.
Oh, I see. Give them something to do while they're learning the theory? Let's get into some concrete examples. How early are we talking?
Right at the start, when the script first introduces the concept of decoherence and reality separating, immediately prompt the viewer to pause.
Just literally stop and do an exercise?
Yeah, have them notice a specific bodily sensation, like ask them to feel a shift in their breath or a tightness in their chest, tying that big physics term to a physical feeling right then and there.
That's brilliant. It makes the abstract concept feel real instantly. Any other examples?
Yeah, there's an interactive section where the author asks, when was the first time you felt it? Tell me in the comments. Right now it's buried. Move that much higher up.
How high? Like right after the intro?
Embed it directly after the initial explanation of superposition. That way you immediately hook the listener's personal experience into the theory.
Right. It makes them validate the theory with their own memories before getting back to the science. That's a huge pacing. So a key theme running through this material seems to be the nature of our choices. The text positions almost all decisive action as a fear-based, premature collapse of superposition.
It does lean very heavily into that.
But, the protagonist still has to live their life, right? People still have to pay rent, make swift career choices, navigate daily survival. How does the text hold up against the necessity of everyday decisiveness?
Relying heavily on the premise that the human nervous system is conditioned to flee from uncertainty is an effective diagnostic tool, yet the text overlooks potential counter-arguments about the very real, practical necessity of making swift choices in the physical world.
Yeah, because not every quick decision is just us running away from our trauma, you know?
Exactly. The weakness here is that by framing all rapid decision-making as a fear-based collapse driven by childhood conditioning, the piece just ignores scenarios where swift, decisive action is healthy.
Or even just necessary, like protective.
Yes, this omission really risks making the listener feel judged for their everyday practical choices. It can make them deeply confused about how to actually function in society while doing all this inner work.
Right, like they might think, oh no, I signed a lease, I'm prematurely collapsing my superposition.
Exactly, which isn't the goal. So the suggestion is to advise the author to add a nuanced distinction between purely reactive, fear-based life decisions and necessary grounded action in the physical world.
So acknowledging that tension.
Acknowledge the tension between maintaining quantum coherence internally and operating in a 3D reality externally.
I love that. Let's give the listeners some concrete examples on how to write that distinction in.
Sure. The author could include a brief caveat acknowledging that while the physical world requires timely decisions, the internal quantum state can still maintain coherence.
Do you have an example of how that might sound in the script?
Yeah, you could phrase it like, this doesn't mean you stop making daily choices or ignore your practical responsibilities. It means you stop forcing the internal resolution of your identity out of panic.
Oh, that's such a relief to hear as a reader. It gives you permission to, survive while you're growing. What about a comparative example?
That's my second concrete example. Provide a mini case study contrasting a healthy, practical decision with a fear-based collapse.
Okay, so maybe contrasting someone taking a temporary job versus quitting altogether?
Exactly. Contrast a healthy decision, like taking a stepping stone job to pay bills while keeping your awareness open to the emerging reality, versus a fear-based collapse.
Where the fear-based one would be like abandoning the emerging reality entirely because the transition is just too scary.
Spot on. That grounds the philosophy so perfectly.
It really does. All right, let's briefly recap our three main takeaways for today. First, shifting the epistemological frame from absolute physical fact to a mathematically grounded, profound model.
Right, making it a lens.
Exact. Second, anchoring the abstract theory into the body with micro-practices much earlier in the pacing to avoid audience fatigue. And third, acknowledging the counterargument by distinguishing between internal coherence and external, practical decisiveness.
It's going to make a huge difference.
The depth and ambition of this work is truly incredible, and we warmly encourage you to implement these structural and thematic tweaks. We would love to invite you to submit your revised material back to the critique for another round of feedback.